It's very nice to be back at the BEA. I've been here on a few occasions and made a few speeches, but they've always been for booksellers who sell little children's books. I've done my 8 books for children. Now I've finally done a book for you grown-ups. Drama and Actors Education, my memoir, which as you've heard, is being published by HarperCollins and coming out in late September. I thought I'd just ramble a little bit about the book, tell you about the genesis of it, a little bit about what it's about, and read you a section of it. It's a kind of a storybook. It's a memoir told in stories of my own life. And what all these stories have in common is that all of them kind of feed into the story of my development as an actor, just as the title suggests. But how in the world did I come to write a book? I'm an actor. I'm accustomed to speaking other people's words. I had never sat down and written for and about myself until about 2008. I'm going to tell you just about the germ of this book. In the summer of 2002, my father was very ill. He was 86 years old. He had an operation. He was very weak and tired, but mainly he was extremely depressed. If he was not going to cheer up, he was not going to live much longer. I found myself taking care of him and my mother, trying to figure out some sort of home care for them, and spending a month with them in their condo in Amherst, Massachusetts. And I realized right away that my main task was just to cheer this old man up. And I got the bright idea of reading bedtime stories to him. My father had always read stories to me and my siblings when we were kids, out of a fabulous fat book of stories called Tellers of Tales. And I had the notion of finding that book in their bookcases and telling them to pick a story and reading them as a story. Now I found it. There it was, only a little worse for wear, as if we had been waiting all these years for just that moment. And that night, when they were all tucked in, my mother in their big 60-year-old bed, and my dad in his little rented hospital bed drawn up next to hers, I showed them this book, and I told them to pick a story. And they picked a story called Uncle Fred Flits By P.G. Woodhouse. This was a story that we'd all loved when we were little children, because it was the funniest of the 100 short stories in this book. But I'd pretty much forgotten it. But I opened the book and I started reading this story, Fred Flits By. And as I read it, more and more of it came back to me. The characters revealed themselves and the complications kicked in. And one by one I remembered all those things that we thought were so damn funny all those years ago. And then, in the middle of this reading, my father started to laugh. He literally came back to life through the power and the joy of this story. And from that moment, I began to think more and more about what it is that I do. I basically tell this story in the preface of this book. And I'm going to read just the very end of this because it's just a suggestion of what got me started, what lit the fuse that ended up being this book. He had given me another gift, although we never lived to see it bear fruit. The period I spent with my parents was one of the most significant in my life. In that memorable month, that Woodhouse story was the most memorable hour. I had spent my entire adult life acting in plays, movies, and television shows. I'd told stories. I'd had a gratifying, fun, and prosperous career. Only infrequently had I paused to plumb the mysteries of my peculiar occupation. That night, however, everything came into focus. Sitting at my parents' bedside and reading them a story. trying to help two old people feel better, came to seem like a distillation of everything my profession is about. In the years to come, my thoughts kept returning to that evening, even after my father was long gone. Finally, spurred on by the events of that night, I decided to write this book. Now, it took me about 4 years to even start. It took me about 3 years to do it. I only finished it in December. My co-star. The book, of course, is all about me, but as you might guess, it's substantially about my family too. Mainly about my father, who was a man of the theater, producer of regional theater, and the creator of Shakespeare festivals. I grew up in his fantastic world, the world of American repertory theater. And even though I sort of wanted to avoid going into family business, it was almost an inevitability. Inexorably, I was drawn into the acting profession. It tells stories of my early years of schooling, living in 8 different towns and going to 8 different public schools as I followed the fortunes of my father. The whole family did, as if we lived in a gypsy wagon. My years at Harvard, when I basically just decided I'd better go with the flow. Acting is what I was destined to do. My years in England studying, my years unemployed in New York, my early years in rep, and finally kind of succeeding on Broadway. Even my dipping my toe into the movies and TV. The memoir ends in the year 1980, which I regard as kind of the watershed year of my life, the intermission, if you will. But by that time, because of the theater, I had gradually turned into the actor that I am today. So, of course, that is principally what the book is about. But it's also my ruminations, not on just the how of acting, but the why of acting. This peculiar, mysterious question: why do I do what I do? Why do people come to watch me do it? What is this peculiar ritual, this peculiar transaction we strike? Mainly the book is fun stories, but I give a little thought to these larger issues too. I'm going to read just one passage, an almost philosophical passage on this subject. It's the beginning of a chapter called Naked. If you want to know why the chapter is called Naked, you're just going to have to buy the book. But it begins, why do all of us want to hear stories? Why do some of us want to tell them? As long as I've been an actor, I've puzzled over those 2 questions. The questions are so basic, so stupidly simple, that it rarely occurs to us to even ask them. We hear about a show, we buy tickets, we file into the theater, we sit in the darkness with a bunch of total strangers. The lights go down, the curtain goes up, and we stare at the stage full of eagerness and hope. What exactly are we hoping for? Why are we all here? What are we looking for? What do we want? It's a little easier to answer such questions when it comes to comedy. Everybody loves a good laugh. But what about drama? If some event in your everyday life were to make you sob uncontrollably, it would be the worst thing you ever lived through. But if something on stage made you cry that hard, you would remember it as the best time you ever had in the theater. Why on earth do we subject ourselves to that? Even long for it? Simply put, we want a good story. We want emotional exercise. We want theater to make us laugh, but we also want it to make us cry. We want to feel pity, fear, anger, hilarity, and joy, but we want those emotions delivered to us in the protective cocoon of the playhouse. And we want to experience them in a more heightened way than we ever can in our humdrum day-to-day existence. We want to be persuaded that we are intensely feeling beings. Why we want, need, and love such an emotional exercise is a mystery. But one thing is clear, none of us can do without it. Well, that's the sort of philosophical thread of the book.